This podcast was made possible by Harbor Media Production Grants, HMPG.
Welcome to Substance Free 02043, brought to you by Hingham Cares. I'm Kristen Arute, and I am President and Program Director of Hingham Cares. Our mission is to reduce substance use among youth in our community. To that end, we bring educational programming into the schools, and we have a website, social media, and our podcast. With us today are special guests, Rory and Chris Earley. So Rory, you are a Hingham Cares board member.
Yes.
As of 6 months ago?
Yes.
Something like that?
Yes.
So tell us what brought you to Hingham Cares.
So I saw an ad on Facebook last year for the Making Healthy Choices meeting with Linda. And for my son, I took my son Ollie to that for 4 weeks. And it was such an amazing experience because I am really passionate about talking to my children early about alcoholism specifically, and it was just a great experience. And I was invited to be a parent partner, and then that turned out to be an invitation to the board, which I was so grateful for.
We love having you on the board. You've been
you.
a really enthusiastic supporter of all the work that we do.
Thank you.
So tell us both where you grew up.
I grew up in Cohasset. I went to Cohasset High. I grew up in an alcoholic home. My father was an alcoholic, but amazing person, full functioning, amazing job, but was an alcoholic. And so nothing overly negative other than the sort of emotional effect of growing up in an alcoholic home.
And what brought you to Hingham, Chris?
Rory. So I grew up in New Jersey, a single parent household. There was addiction. And other than that, there were opportunities that I had. And so I came to Boston for school and then met Rory, and she was from the South Shore. So we went to the South Shore, and it's been very nice down here. Because Rory and I, we've lived in Boston for 10 years, and it was a big adjustment coming to the suburbs, but it's been wonderful. Raising our kids here, Hingham is a wonderful community. So this is where we should be. So it feels good.
Yeah, he said, well, we're not moving to your hometown. And I said, okay, then Hingham.
I won, kind of.
Kind of. You compromised a little bit.
Yes.
So how long have you been in Hingham? Tell us about your kids, how old they are. What are your ties to Hingham?
So my mom actually grew up in Hingham. She's one of 8. So this is kind of like my second hometown. A lot of family still in Hingham. We've been here for 5 years in June, right?
Yes.
And so my son is almost 12, Oliver, and my daughter is 8. So I have a middle schooler and a third grader at East. And they love it. We were in an apartment in a high-rise in the city, which was amazing. We had, the city as our backyard. But it is nice to be in, with a yard and the community. And Hingham's a great community, so we really love it. Do you agree?
It's been wonderful. Right. I mean, it was a big transition coming from Boston to high-rise, living in a house, and it's been a total blessing. Hingham has been wonderful for us on many different levels. So we love the community. And it's been wonderful for our kids. That's what it's about. So we're very happy.
Tell us a little bit about your growing up years in a single parent household. So that's a little bit different from what you have right now with your family.
Oh, a little bit.
Were you with your mom or your dad?
Yeah. So it was
We're going to dive right in.
Are you sure you want to know?
Get comfortable.
No, I'll give you the abbreviated Cliff Notes version as best as I can. So my father was a successful executive in New York City. He was self-employed, doing really well. He was, though, a very, very hardcore major league alcoholic. And so he lost everything. He became homeless, and my mother raised me alone. And he passed away in the streets of New York City. We don't know when or how, but his demise was on the streets of New York. And my mother sort of raised me alone and wanted to give me every opportunity. So things are really hard, but there were also opportunities. She put me in private schools and sort of taught me a work ethic to apply myself. But I witnessed true dysfunction everywhere. And so I'm very motivated to not repeat that. And so having conversations with you, with Rory, this is important for me personally, because it's cathartic to talk about this stuff. It's healthy. But everything I do is designed to have a life that my father couldn't have because of addiction. Because thankfully, I'm not an addict, and I have never been. So I don't purport to be, but I do have. Rory and I are both adult children of alcoholics, and so that leaves you with certain good things and certain bad things, right? And so I try to take the good as much as I can and work on the bad so it doesn't impact, my family and what we're trying to accomplish together. We're trying to do big things and have a healthy life together.
Did your mom struggle with addiction as well, or was it just your dad?
Not necessarily.
She was very codependent. Like there was a lot of other layers that weren't necessarily addiction, but like not positive emotional experiences, I would say.
Yeah, it was dysfunctional, right? But like Rory and I are just trying to change. At least we're trying to change. Take the good with what we had growing up, right? Rory had a different flavor of experience, right? We had different experiences, not good or bad or different, but just different.
Yeah.
And so the whole idea, we are unified to create a different
And break the cycle.
Break the cycle. I feel like it's easy and it's also hard to do.
Yes.
But we're very focused, intentional about this. That's why Rory is so involved in the community, loves this organization, right, in particular, and we are just trying to do the best we can with what we have and make sure our kids have everything that we didn't have.
Right.
And make a better future for them. That's what this is about for us.
That's incredible. So I feel like parents want that for their kids anyway, and a lot of it goes hand in hand with education. So your parents' generation probably didn't understand exactly what happened with brain science and addiction. We know a lot more now. So that educational foundation, I'm sure, has been very helpful for you as well in terms of making different decisions
100%.
about your own lifestyle.
Definitely.
So Rory, tell us about your growing up years with your dad. Your dad was an alcoholic. Did your mom struggle as well?
No, absolutely not. My mom also came from an alcoholic home too. So she, first of all, I'd just like to say my parents were excellent, amazing people. My mother's amazing. Oh, yeah. And my father was an amazing, smart engineer and did amazing things. But, it was sort of the thing at 5 o'clock, he would come home and start drinking. Mm-hmm. So my issue that really bothered me was, I admired him so much and how smart he was, and then I hated the person he was at night. Mm. And so it was this like yin and yang of like being mad the next day from the behavior of the night before, and he didn't even know what I was mad about. That set forth this sort of trigger or something in me, and I think when we met, we recognized these sort of, I don't love the phrase adult child of an alcoholic, but we use it. There's certain characteristics that you have. You push people away. That's a huge one. And I pushed you away many times. And like certain things, and you're super hypersensitive to everyone's mood. You walk into a room and you survey the scene and so I feel like, but even though that could be viewed as a negative thing, it also has been a positive thing, that like with empathy and like I'm very caring and I can read your, vibes and so there's, positive things that come out of being hyper vigilant with like reading the room. Being an empath is something that I am very much into, and I think it was because you'd walk in and say, okay, did he drink yet? He's not, like you. And I'm like that with adults too, like because I don't drink by choice, and I can immediately be like, that person's been drinking. And not in a judgmental way, but it's just like code in my head of how to survey the scene, I feel like.
Radar's
yeah.
advanced.
Is that weird?
No, I relate.
Not at all.
So,
it's been ingrained in you.
Yeah.
And it's almost, it sounds like a form of PTSD.
Maybe, perhaps.
And
There's
like
trauma.
a survival skill.
Trauma.
Right, childhood trauma stuff. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because if you are expecting bad behavior as a result of somebody else's behavior, then you're more finely tuned to it.
Speaking on that, I went to a therapist in my 20s when I was trying to find myself, and she said, you expect to be disappointed. And I was like, that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, I do. Like, if I'm meeting someone, like, they're definitely going to be late. Like, expect disappointment, which is something that from that day on, I was like, I need to, like, change that. And so I try to change that, but it's rears its ugly head once in a while. My parents were amazing people that did the best they can. My dad had a disease, and he died of his disease from pancreatic cancer, which was directly attributed to his drinking and smoking. Oh, wow. But so I feel like it's really important to talk about, this stuff, because I want other people to not feel alone, but I also with the sort of asterisk or caveat that, like, my father was amazing. Like, he was a great, great guy. I wish Chris got to meet him.
Me too.
But I do feel it's really important to talk about things like that are hard, like that, or I'm involved in a lot of end of life stuff as an end of life doula, like talk about death, like talk about these things that like people, you know, as an Irish person, like, you know, the Irish lace curtains, like, don't talk about it. We don't, they're dirty laundry. I think it's important to talk about these things to make people feel a little less alone in anything that they're struggling with.
Exactly, because not everybody can talk about it.
Right,
and I think it depends on the phase that you're in the journey as well. And it also depends on your age. I think, you know, one of the things that we like about doing Hingham Cares Day, where we bring in all those speakers, is there could be a handful of kids in the audience that are struggling with exactly what's being talked about, but they don't talk about it because they're at a certain age where they don't know who to turn to, they don't know what to say, they don't even know if what they're experiencing is normal or abnormal. So having that person like you be very open about your experiences, I think, is an attractive quality.
Oh,
and
thanks.
and I'm sure it brings comfort to a lot of people. So you've talked about some changes that you've made to your adulting as a result of what you experienced as children. I know you, Rory, you live a sober lifestyle.
Yes.
Chris, you don't. You drink on occasion.
Yeah.
You've made that decision, which, you know, as an adult, we all have that prerogative. So I'd love to hear from each of you how you came to that decision and how it manifests itself today, and how the two of you can remain in sync where you're doing something slightly different.
I'm going to answer that and just back up to the start of our relationship. Is we met, and you know, she didn't know my story, I didn't know her story about her upbringings, and that we were walking on the Charles River one night. It was a late spring, and I shared with her my story, and she was...
No, I shared my story, which pushed you to
But
share
I
your
never
story.
shared, you know, childhood friends, you know, other people I was in relationships with didn't even know, like, my stuff.
I called him the iceberg.
The iceberg. But when she said that, it was like whiplash, like, oh, I can roll with her.
This is a safe space.
Right.
Just like we were just talking about.
Right. And so that to me was a pivotal moment where it's like, she's different, you know, she gets me. And so that's the genesis of what got us here today, of trying to I keep talking about, you know, change the narrative, being intentional about it. We're not just arbitrary random parents, you know, chaotic household. It's like, I want a smooth household, and that's what we have engineered through intention.
It's simple, we always say.
Simple.
Like,
it's a
keep things
simple
simple.
home, because you need to like think about this stuff, because like we don't want our kids having PTSD and trauma and hiding booze. You know, we don't want that. It's like it's a healthiest environment that we can manufacture, that we can create, right? Because this does require creation. It can't just be happenstance. Right?
I love the use of that word, intentional. You said it's intentional, like it's
like we know.
conscious
So
effort.
that and so, but that day where I felt very in sync with Rory and we got married, but that was when I could, you know, be honest, and that she's helped me progress, you know.
I made him who he is today. That's what he's saying.
You know, progress through trauma. You don't even know you have. The worst trauma is when you don't even know you're traumatized.
Right.
Because we talk about being honest with yourself. I didn't even talk about this stuff.
Right.
And so
But you grew up in a household that didn't talk about things.
But I would encourage the community as best, you know, and Roy's a good, you know, advocate about this. We just talked about this, talking about uncomfortable things, death, addiction. This is real life.
So you were just sort of muddling through? Did you know that your growing up years were a little bit different from your peers?
Not the extent, no, because that's all you know.
Right.
And it's not that, like, if you see your father panhandling, it's not that weird, because it's like, well, dad's panhandling. And he's, you know, but that's just like, it's not that weird.
It's your lived experience.
Yeah,
Right.
but now that I'm a parent, if my kids saw me in Boston, you know, disheveled panhandling, it's like, that's not a good look for my kids to witness.
Right.
And that will stick with them. So it's been hard to not lead a life of dysfunction. Again, I hate to say it again, intentional.
Right.
Of
No,
like,
that's a perfect
we're going to
word.
design a better path.
And also, when I have like a really big family, and when he came into my family and would come to cookouts, he'd be like, "Oh, this is how a family works." Like he didn't know, and I was almost like, "What do you mean? What do you mean you don't know? Like you don't get this?" And then I slowly realized, like, okay, and like, you know, certain aspects of his personality that were distasteful.
What?
You know, my mother, who was his biggest advocate, was like, remember where he comes from. Remember what he experienced. Like, people are a product of where they come from. And so, but I do feel like my family really like welcomed you, and
great.
And with
Great
that
family.
sort of love, you
Yes.
were able to be like, okay, like, and and I always make the joke that like I had this ice pick and I slowly chipped away at the iceberg. I'm still chipping away, but like
I think you made him melt.
But anyway, but he's and I'm sure he'll get into this more. But like he's completely transformed himself to someone that was like very angry and didn't know where that anger was stemming from because it was in a deep space that wasn't sort of tapped into, to someone now that is like meditating every day and has a journal and is all these things that were like, I'm not at that stage yet. I don't do those things, but like he's
getting in touch with your self.
Yeah.
Totally transforming the person that he is. And, I think it's really admirable because, his childhood was definitely, a lot worse than mine and traumatic. And even up until like law school, I feel like the dysfunction of his whole family, his two brothers, put him on this path. Like, I can't believe he's as successful as he is now. We say that all the time.
Rory is a large part of that, of holding, we talk about holding the mirror in your face. And like, Chris, this is the angry guy you are right now. Like, you don't know that. Like, I would try to provoke fights with people. I would try to push your buttons because I wanted to like anger you and get a response. And now it's like, maybe it's mellowing out with age, right? We all get older and we mellow out, but like anger is real. And and those emotions must go somewhere. When you're feeling negative about something, there's a lack there, right? When you grow up around trauma.
And you hadn't really been taught any coping skills
whatsoever.
It's like, as you said, education has been improved. This is the 80s. It was almost like the world that was like 100 years ago in terms of where we are now. Right? In terms of like talking about this openly and being real. It's been...
and like gender roles, like you're a boy, don't cry, like be strong, those sort of things from our childhood. Like
I grew up watching Bewitched, and Darren was always going and having those 3 martini lunches. So
normal.
It was treated as perfectly normal. I don't know how you do that and go through the rest of your day, but
can you imagine?
It was part of a sitcom. So nobody would ever stop and think my dad having drinking as much as he did is a problem, because it was never conveyed as a problem through the media that we were
it was almost antisocial not to drink at lunch, I would think, right? It's almost like, what's your problem?
That's how business deals were done, or the impression that you got.
100%.
Steakhouse. There was a steakhouse in New York City right near Times Square.
Yeah.
Or right near Broadway. And that's where his dad would go every single day. And 2 years ago, we went back to it and sat down at the bar and had like dinner. And it was like sort of cathartic and like sort of like, and because he died when Chris was like 7. So like he doesn't know him. And so I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting experience to do, almost 100%. Sort of like therapeutic.
100%.
Right.
And he'd be happy and proud. And he'd love,
he definitely is.
He'd love Rory and love the kids. And but there's a lot of stuff in the background in terms of like what happened. But I think my mom, to her credit, like, and my family we just have stuff, like any other family. But she did the best she could with what she had.
Right.
She tried to like press the right button. So now, she did something right to allow me to be in this position, to have the opportunity to be evolving man, because if she had pressed the wrong buttons too much, that we wouldn't be having this conversation. I don't think it would have turned out this way.
Right. Did you ever feel like you were struggling with alcohol at any point in your life?
Not necessarily. In college, a lot of partying, but never that line of dependency. That's I know people personally, and that's happened. I've seen that, right?
Yeah.
We all of us have. We've all seen people go too far.
Yes.
It becomes like clinical. There's a problem.
Right.
But no, thankfully no. But which is almost weird to me. Like,
well, you most likely didn't have the genetic component of addiction.
Yeah.
Did you start drinking at a young age?
Not really, no. No, in college, a lot of partying.
Because that can also be a factor as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
The younger you start, the more
100%.
the higher the proclivity to becoming addicted.
Absolutely. Earlier, the worse,
Yeah.
right?
But you weren't turned off, right? By like because of your dad, you weren't turned off in high school and college to drink, right?
Not necessarily. It was almost like it didn't happen. It was almost like that's normal.
blocked it out.
Yeah. And like you don't know what you don't know.
But you were turned off.
So I definitely, drank a tiny bit. My mother had me work like waitressing and busing jobs at Stars and Tosca in high school. So like Friday and Saturday nights I was working, which I'm definitely doing for my children because it kind of just kept me busy, and it was a social life within the restaurant. So I wasn't out in a field drinking with my friends. Then in college, like I definitely drank in grad school and like normal amount, but like never a lot. I've never in my life, I can say, blacked out. And then my 20s and 30s, like it was like, I would rather have a good meal and a Diet Coke. Like I would just like, it didn't appeal to me. Like, you know, chocolate and candy appeals to me way more. So it was just like never something that I was super into. And then a few years ago, with all the research, and this may be way too off topic, but with all the research with like dementia and breast cancer and all the things that are like directly related to even moderate drinking. And this is something I don't really talk about because I feel like people immediately feel judged. Right. And I don't want to judge anyone, but like, I was like, if I can just like give that like small percentage that I do drink, maybe like once in a while, if we go to Tosca, I'll have a cocktail. I was just like, I'm going to completely cut it out and reduce my risk of those things. You know, it has been a little bit difficult socially because when you do go out, people feel completely, if you're like, oh, I'm not going to drink, they feel that it's a judgment on their drinking, which it's not. I don't care. And I'm mostly the designated driver. My friends actually love it.
I would love to know how the two of you, did you have a deliberate conversation about this is what we're going to keep in our home, this is how often we're going to drink, or is it something that just kind of evolved as your relationship evolved?
Evolved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we've never had a bar. Like I feel like most people have a bar, right? Like in their house.
There's wine in the house.
Yeah, we never like
so. You've just always been innately on the same page.
Yes.
Like,
even when we didn't have kids, we were not married. Like he will drink like a craft beer that's like $20 from the fruit center on a Friday or Saturday night. He will go on Friday and get that beer and drink it and like enjoy it. Like
I enjoy a good beer, and it doesn't become. I'm not educated enough in this space to know what I think I'm past the point of being super vulnerable.
Yes.
Because if I got through that, it's like, I think, you know, it would have manifested. I'm not saying that there's some insulation here against anything in this life, but I just feel like, okay, like I've demonstrated to myself that, you know, having a beer is not dangerous activity. Whereas if I used to smoke. If I had one cigarette right now, I think I'd be a full-on cigarette junkie.
I nipped that in the bud quickly.
That was the worst, getting over cigarette addiction.
Oh, so gross.
Oh my God, 15 years. I mean, disgusting.
I don't know that alcoholics drink to enjoy the flavor of a craft beer.
No, it's
a totally different motivation.
Oh, it's so much deeper.
And the other thing is like, I never want my kids to like see the distinction of like, mom or dad normal and mom or dad after they've had a few drinks, because I know that children pick up on that from a very young age. I did. I was like, oh, dad's eyes are glassy. Like, I know what I'm getting into. This is totally cliche, but the whole like mommy juice and like mommy needs a glass of wine at 5, or like I go to play dates, or have maybe more in the city, like where like they would have wine at a play date, or like we won't even get into the sports games where they bring a cooler and everyone's drinking at the baseball field.
Right.
That kills me.
But at the same time, to the point earlier about education,
Yeah.
what parents need to understand is that modeling is so critical
Yes.
to prevention.
Everything.
Right.
Everything that you do, and it's not just alcohol.
Everything.
It's everything, you know,
Right.
living a healthy lifestyle, making healthy food choices, you know,
Right.
what have you.
Right.
Your kids watch you. You're their
100%.
first role
Oh
model.
my God. It's like
So-
like super high sophisticated radar detection. Like, what's dad's mood? We're talking about reading the room. You know, how's dad gonna react to that comment? How is he gonna react to dad getting cut off in the car? Like,
Yes.
reading mom. Like, how's mom handling this external thing?
She's screaming at us to clean.
But like, that's the imprint.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
the stamp, right?
And
so
that establishes behavior in them as
100%. So
Yeah.
like, we're all about like a boring household.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, nothing really complex going on. There's no like secret, hiding stuff. And I've seen things like from my own father. I've seen things that if my kids saw them, it could break them, right? Because like, kids shouldn't see this stuff.
Right.
And so it's, modeling. She and I are just so obsessed in a good way with just like a better future, because we have two rock stars to work with. So God was so good to give us such incredible clay, for lack of a better word, right? But no, but seriously, like to like mold, because you do mold them. We're molders.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like, I can speak to like being molded in sort of an unusual way.
And you always talk about just like showing up, just like being there. Like we never, if we go out to dinner, it's like 5 p.m. and we're back at 6, and like they're in the same spot looking at their screens. They don't even notice we're gone. But we never go away without them. Like we're always there. Everyone goes to everyone's sports games. Like your presence and, I think is huge.
Oh, it's everything.
And we're privileged to be able to do that. Like my mom worked so hard and she was working overtime. Like she was to put us through college, always working. And I'm lucky enough that I stay home and Chris works his schedule that he gets up at 3 a.m. so that he's home at 5. And so he never misses anything. And and I think they just know the foundation is so solid.
Right.
And that, this is a lot of the things we talked about with Linda when we had the house party, she just kept saying just create this foundation so that they feel safe. So they, instead of being oh no, what's mom gonna say? They say I gotta go talk to my mom about this.
Exactly.
And flipping the script. Self-esteem is the number one thing for me. I would rather a secure, confident child than A+, magna cum laude or whatever. Because I think my confidence in life has gotten me so far. And that was certainly my mother's doing. Mm-hmm. My mother instilled such confidence in us. Mm-hmm. And my sister and I are she's a business owner, we're so confident and such strong women because of my mom. And I just really want my children to be like that too.
Right.
Because that gets you farther in life than grades and
Absolutely.
stuff.
Right.
Absolutely.
Can you share any anecdotes about, you've talked about a little bit about the choices that you've made and not wanting to come across as judgmental to your peers.
Right.
Any anecdotes about people who've either embraced what you've decided to do, the lifestyle that you've chosen, or anecdotes about pushback that you've gotten?
Embracing, there's several people in my sort of orbit or circle of mom friends that I love that are actually recovering alcoholics that are in the program. And I love that because I can really talk freely with them about how I feel, and I love their perspective. And we know when we go out to dinner, we're having a Diet Coke, and that's been great. And I love to be super supportive of them in their journey, and I love to hear about it. And as far as, it's nothing major on the flip side of the coin. Just sometimes oh, you don't drink? Every single time I've met a new person, it's we should grab a glass of wine together sometime. And I'm always sure. And then I go and I don't get wine. My personal opinion is it's a sensitive topic in the same way that, a woman's weight is a sensitive topic or whatever, you know what I mean? It's very personal and people feel judged immediately. So I try not to talk about it, despite the fact that I am very passionate about talking about it.
So early on, did you feel like you had to make excuses for your lifestyle, or
Never.
you always felt confident in that
because
choice?
I am very resolute in my decision and why. And I'll be no, I don't drink. I grew up in an alcoholic home. It's not my thing.
Right.
And I'll be self-deprecating and say I'm too much of a control freak to let go of any control. And why are you laughing?
That was evil.
But yeah, it's mostly all positive, but I follow a few sort of on Instagram or something, these health gurus that are really talking about the amount of alcohol that is healthy is 0 alcohol. And I'm oh yes, I really agree with that. And I really think it's just the norm. Everyone, let's get a drink. Let's grab a drink. If it's Monday night, let's grab a drink.
Right.
But mostly I'm not in the working world. I'm, in Ubering my children around. So it's not even that big of a deal anymore. You know what I mean? It's not I'm out with colleagues and I feel left out. Mostly all good.
Same thing with you?
Well, yeah,
Because he drinks.
Rory doesn't drink, by choice, and I do drink, very moderately by choice, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and that's cool. That works for us, right? And that's just that works really well. But when I sit here, it's we have so much work to parent. There was no modeling of a normal marriage,
Oh yeah,
nor modeling of childbearing or rearing kids. So a lot of this is kind of on the fly. And this is hard freaking work, really tough. And I can't speak for you, right? I don't want to, but I know for me it's just challenging. Mm-hmm. So little things like meditation quiets the chaotic catastrophe. Because when I met Rory, it was I was, like I said, looking for a fight, looking to you to provoke me, because I was angry. But I would encourage the audience, if they don't already, just try it and see if it clicks a little bit.
Try what?
Meditation. And little things, because that has quieted the noise for me personally. Whatever it is, if chess quiets you, if playing Frisbee, whatever it takes to, because I know a lot of people listen to this can relate to anger, can empathize with being weighed down by stuff, right? And so whatever your portal is to some lightness, that's been transformed. I'm right now writing a memoir about my experience, because there are a lot of kids that come from the environment that I came from that are not as lucky, that they didn't get out, that they are bogged down. So my perfect world coming from this, what this book would bring is speaking to kids who are struggling, like, Alateen perhaps, just kids that are in these chaotic environments. There's booze everywhere. There's booze in Hingham, there's booze in Weymouth, there's booze everywhere. There's booze all around us.
Right.
And so there's just a lot of kids growing up in these homes, right? And there's dysfunction. And, but as we talked about, which keeps, I keep thinking about, is talking about this stuff, honestly. So I'm writing a memoir so my kids know about dad, so they get like why dad is the way he is, so they can maybe glean some insight, because maybe they can relate to it. Maybe they have some feeling, no matter what we're trying to do in our household, maybe they can relate to part of my story about my view of the world and how I think. But it's very cathartic to write, right? To write the story. And it allows me to, it's like my father's memory lives on, right? Because my family, they're all good people. We just had issues. Like every family, everyone listening to this, there's issues in the family.
Right.
Some deeper than others. But my problems are my problems, right? Other people, they have their own problems, right?
Right.
But I feel like if there's kids, there has to be space for kids to not be saddled by our adult problems, right? And that's where we just try to design a life where the kids are thriving, very vanilla. Because kids like boring, right? Kids like vanilla, so then they can just thrive.
Right.
So I just said a lot, but I just feel like a lot of people can relate to this stuff, right? Dysfunction, trauma.
Right, and I think that there's always that element of trying to keep up with what everybody else is doing that creates stress. So to hear you guys talk about this very boring, vanilla, plain kind of
Simple
lifestyle
life,
that you live, simple life, there's a lot of appeal to that. I mean, I'm thinking Little House on the Prairie, Well,
yeah.
In a cabin in the woods. But I think
we do have electricity. No,
indoor plumbing?
yes.
A great show, by the way.
No, but that element of simplicity in a chaotic world is so important. You want your home to be kind of a harbor in this world.
100%, safe harbor, yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
and to build that out for your kids so that they have a place which you didn't have and you didn't have growing up. You didn't go home and feel like, I can sigh now, I can take a deep breath and feel comfortable. You didn't have that. So you're creating that for your kids, which I think is very commendable.
Thank you.
And I love the fact that it's intentional. You use that word intentional. But what I'm hearing from the two of you is that you're very much in sync.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot that's very instinctual.
Yeah.
Very much so.
You're on the same page here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you can't do this without being in sync. It's too hard. It wouldn't work.
Right.
And like Rory's been super patient, because we used to be very more volatile, just like very prone to anger. And like, I'm writing about this in my book about, we were at a dry cleaner once. I was looking to pick a fight with a guy. I thought he was staring at me. He wasn't even looking at me. Just like trying to provoke. But Rory has put the mirror in front of my face and said, this isn't the way to do it. And so it took a whole lot to be able to sit here and have a conversation about this openly, honestly. I'm an open book.
Right.
I have a podcast and I talk openly about trauma, about adult children of alcoholics. So it resonates with Rory, resonates with me, and that's why it's awesome having this conversation with you. It's important stuff.
Given your growing up years and the choices that you've made as adults and as parents, how do you translate that into conversations with your kids?
My mother was always very honest with us. There was never any sweeping under the rug. Whereas I always joke, Chris's family, everything was swept under the rug. And if we would fight, he'd be like, all right, do you want to be done with this? And I'm like, absolutely not. We're going to talk about every single point. So I feel like it's super important to be honest. So from a very young age, obviously my children don't have grandfathers because they both died. And so we talk about Grandpa Moose and Grandpa Joe in the stars looking over us. And I'd say around like between 8 and 10 is where we really started talking to Ollie, our oldest, about the reason for the death and how basically what I'm very worried about is that my children are going to have this genetic component for addiction. And despite all of the talking that I do and all of the advocacy work that I might do, they're still going to have that, and it's going to kick in, and there's, not a lot that I can do to overcome their genetic makeup.
Right.
In order to sort of get ahead of that, that's what the making healthy choices thing, and I would 100% recommend that to anyone listening.
Guiding Good Choices.
Guiding Good Choices. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Guiding Good Choices is so great because for 3 weeks we did just the moms, and then on the 4th week the kids came in and did this actual role playing. And so I can tell Ollie a million times, like, oh, if someone asks you to have a drink, just say no. But until he actually is in the situation, and this was so great. I actually watched him from across the room at how he responded, and it was really like great because he actually spoke the words and like played it out. Just being open and honest with them. And I feel like just generally overall, we're pretty open and honest about everything. Like we had all the talks very early. If Ollie asks me like really like inappropriate question, well, not inappropriate, but really deep, like, whether it's about sex education or whatever, like I'm always very open and honest with him. And the other thing from the Guiding Healthy Choices, one of the things Linda mentioned was, making sure that your kid feels comfortable, like if they're in a gym or they're with a bunch of people that are drunk, like that they feel safe to call you. And I always tell that to Ollie. I said, I will never be mad at you. Like I want you to be honest, like always be honest with me and I won't be mad. And like little small things, like, we've seen him, you know what I'm saying? Like being honest, like he'll lie and then he'll immediately came and say, no, I'm sorry, I was lying. And so like that sort of like relationship, I think, is just building up.
Because a foundation of honesty.
Yeah. And I know he's going to drink and I know he's going to, whatever. But hopefully he can, make good choices. But if I could jump back to the house party that we had with all the moms, I think there were like 12 moms there. Everyone was talking about their, so like, what are we going to do about drinking and smoking? And then one woman was very concerned about marijuana gummies. And then at the end, my friend, who's actually a recovering alcoholic, whose brother-in-law passed away from drugs, from an accidental overdose, said, alcohol and weed gummies, like I'm not even worried about that. Like I'm worried about my teenager taking one pill and dying. And so and I was like, oh wow. So I think like with all the fentanyl and all the stuff that's coming out, like that really sort of changed my perspective a lot too. Like we really have to drive home that like you'd never take anything, like never take a pill, never take, like it's a whole different ball game than having a 6-pack with the boys after a game. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm trying to like start that conversation as well.
It's a far more dangerous world.
Yeah.
And you walk that fine line between making sure that they're aware of the dangers that are out there and getting so carried away that they are dismissive of it. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
That's always the fine line that you walk as a parent with any issue. But certainly in today's day and age, like you said, fentanyl's found in everything. And
So
it's the
scary.
tiniest dose
Can
can
kill
take
you.
someone's life.
Yeah.
Yep.
Rory just said a lot, but the first thing she said, hit me with a ton of bricks, is we can't control genetics. Like we can't fight that fight. And
So
that's really,
scary.
that's scary to me and her, right? As we try to, so like we can control what we can control, and that's it, right? So the foundation of honesty you're talking about, like that's what this is about, foundation, right? Like solid, you can talk to dad about anything, talk to mom about anything. Because if they have that access to their parents, it's like they're less likely to go off the reservation, I feel like.
Yes.
Or be
And anything is-
secretive and
Yeah,
hide stuff.
but anything, they could go off the reservation. Like but hopefully they come back without some serious damage, right?
Right.
Because there's different levels of going off the reservation.
Right.
You know? So hopefully they, because we're going to get pushed back and, I hate you, Mom, I hate you, Dad, when the teenagers
we're already getting that from our preteen.
You're the worst mother in the world.
Yeah, of
You're
course.
the worst father. You're not coming.
Well, they know
to my birthday
everything. We know
party.
nothing. That's the way this works.
Right.
But like, hopefully, the modeling, the role playing, like, again, clicks
That's
those.
so great.
Yeah, clicks those buttons
Right.
that they need to deal with this more dangerous world that they're in.
Linda had this amazing way of framing it. If someone says, "Hey, do you want to smoke this joint?" You can just like change the conversation. Be like, I'm actually going to hit Nona's and grab an ice cream, instead of being like, "No, I don't want to do that."
Right.
You can just like change the conversation, pivot. And like I was like, that is so smart, because
Right.
you're not outwardly saying like, I'm not going to be cool and I'm not going to do that, but you're just like making a different plan, and then maybe that person follows suit.
Oh, sure, I'll get an ice cream.
Yeah, you know what I
Right.
mean? So we've talked about that with Ollie, and because this boils down to also like middle school problems that even aren't about drugs and alcohol, like
Peer
about
pressure.
peer pressure, and about making fun of someone, or bullying and all that stuff that's happening.
Right.
Like, do the right thing, like be the good kid and like make the right choice.
Right. I like to tell the story of my son when he was in high school. He would be home on the weekends, and I would ask him, do you get invited to parties? Like, how come you're not going out with your friends? Like, how come you're not doing this? And he said, I don't want to go to those parties because there's always alcohol involved. He goes, and I have a future. I don't want to do anything that's going to mess up my future.
Oh my God.
Yes.
You did a good job.
We have, those are his words, not mine. So we have those red rubber bracelets that we hand out that say, I have a future on them. We want kids to remember
Oh, good for you. That's amazing.
the healthy
That's
the
great.
choices that I make now could
Affect.
potentially
That's
impact
success.
my future.
That's huge success to me.
So do you have any specific advice for parents in particular on how to encourage their kids to make healthy choices around substances?
Well, you have to make healthy decisions yourself because they're watching you, right? So if they see, I've seen, if I see Dad, pounding tall boys of beer or vodka, well, that's probably not a good scene. So be sensitive to what you're demonstrating, right? It starts with you. I think the parents are the leaders of the home and need to disseminate a healthy message. So watch your behavior because they're listening, they're watching always. So I think that's really important. That's what you will reap. I feel like, right? If you're, we spend all our time with our kids. We don't have we don't have this figured out. This is an ongoing odyssey.
Oh yeah, we're no experts,
right? Of like trying to figure it out, but they're not going to see, me, being hauled out of the house by the cops or falling into, a chaotic state. So I would encourage parents to be mindful of what they're showing. If that's a good thing or a bad thing, be sensitive to that. And because they're going to be watching and taking notes
Right.
of what mom and dad are doing,
Those
and then just talking about it, like just not sweeping it under the rug like Chris's family did, and just like saying, because many of my friends who have older children said, there's so many house parties in Hingham and the parents provide alcohol, and the view is I'd rather them be safe in my house. And I think if you just talk to your kids and say like, this is going to be like so abundant and readily available to you, and describe to them, well, specifically in our case, describe to them like their where they come from and who they come from and how dangerous that could be, and then just keep an open and honest dialogue. And I think that's all you can do. I mean, we did so much stuff as teenagers and snuck out and drank, and so I don't think my children are going to be perfect, but I hope that I can give them as much information and open communication so that they do the right thing.
Do you have any advice in particular for young people? And we can talk down to, middle school age or high school age or older, but for young people on how to make healthy choices around substances.
Well, I've noticed that mocktails are a new big thing. Like I'm obsessed with social media, and I see all these young 20-year-olds, especially in New York City, that like there's like bars that are just mocktails. There's mocktail lines of, and it's sort of like, I think that the pendulum is swinging the other way, that where people are deciding, like, especially since people are being so healthy now and like, wanting to biohack and all that stuff, that like it can be cool to not drink. Like you don't have to drink to be cool,
right.
or smoke or whatever the substance is. I think we've talked about alcohol a lot because that's sort of like our frame of reference, because that's where we, and
it's the most common substance
right,
used.
Right. So I would tell a young person, you don't have to drink. Like don't fall into the peer pressure. Like just the actual research that's coming out about the health problems that could be directly attributed to even moderate drinking, and that it's a slippery slope. Like I think I'm 45. I feel like many of my age women are very slippery slope, like glass of wine at 5:00 every night to deal with the chaos of kids. And they don't think they have an issue, but if you're drinking every night, I think that might be a little bit of an issue. I mean, and I say that without judgment. Tell them they can still have fun without being intoxicated.
Right.
I do.
Yep. There is life without alcohol.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And just to layer on your question, there's also the audience that maybe the young kids, they're growing up around the addiction,
right.
but they're not themselves really they're making good choices on their own, but they're involved in a tough circumstance at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a situation which can almost be more complex, because like you're trying to, follow your compass, and you're 14 years old, and your brain is still being developed, and so you can't control what happens in the house. Like you can't control mom and dad, right? So those are the kids that I relate to the best, because that's dysfunction, right? And so I encourage if there's anyone wants to talk, like reach out to me. And Rory too. Like we are not the experts in the field. We are experts in our story and coming out of a tough story and making a better story out of that, right? So that's, there's two types of kids that aren't really having any issues with substance abuse, those that are having substance abuse issues or in the precipice of it, and those that are growing up, because it's worse if they see mom and dad with substance abuse issues. It's hard to go the other path, because that just creates, emotional lacks and just a lot of dysfunction. So those are the kids that I'm super sensitive. Those are the kids I want to, that's why I'm writing my book, is to speak to them, because it's a tough weight to be surrounded by addiction, be it one parent or both parents.
You're like on an island unto yourself almost.
Yeah.
And they think it's normal. Like you said about yours, both parents are drinking every night. Like, oh, that's the norm. That's what happens.
Right.
They don't know.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And more times than not, that in my research and just reading leads to a life of failure. On some level, because there's something weighing the person down, right? And those are the kids that I'm very sensitive to, that growing up, they're going to be more prone to a more difficult life.
Right.
So you really have to really work hard, I think, to make good choices the best you can.
And not even just addiction, but the emotional impact of growing up. Like that was my situation. Like I never got into drinking a lot, but I definitely had some, emotional stuff going on from my childhood.
Me too.
Right.
It's hard not to.
Anger, stuff like that. You said.
Right.
It's really hard, but that's why we're trying to, just again rewrite the narrative and do a little bit better, because the way we parent is the way our kids will parent in all likelihood. So you're talking about generational stuff, right? This isn't just like our kids; it's our kids. Well,
you're developing behaviors that you want them to adopt. You're modeling behavior that you want them to adopt, 100%. As opposed to what the two of you are doing, which is let's do something different from the behavior.
That's very well said. 100%.
That we grew up with.
100%.
I saw a quote recently, like generational wealth is like calm, happy, like healed home. Like that's generational wealth, not money.
I like it.
Like sort of like
Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah. We're circling back, Kristen.
So, Chris, you have a podcast that addresses these issues and more. Would you share with our listeners where they can find it?
Yeah, so it's called the Early Show Podcast. So I'm a personal injury attorney, and I like to speak to other personal injury attorneys who have been through hard circumstances of some sort, right? It's not a cookie cutter, where'd you go to law school type of show. It's a conversation with people who have succeeded notwithstanding very tough odds, people who have grit, people who just fight that's resonates with me. And so I have a lot of inspiring guests on the show. So I would encourage you to check out. It's called the Early Show Podcast.
And that's EARLEY.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
two E's. Thank you. So even if you're not into the law, you may can glean something, because they say success leaves clues. So I'm always studying successful people and seeing what they're doing. So hopefully there's some value there for the audience. So I encourage you to check it out for sure.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for being here. This has been a really great conversation.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you for having us. I'm humbled that you chose us to be on the show. Really appreciate the work you're doing in the community, so keep doing it. If I can help out in any way. Obviously, Rory is, sleeves rolled up helping, but if I can do anything, I would love to. So thank you for everything.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chris.
I love being a part of it.
This has been Substance Free 02043, brought to you by Hingham Cares. Our guests today were Rory and Chris Earley, and we hope that you will tune in again. For more info or to get involved, go to hinghamcares.org.
This podcast was made possible by Harbor Media Production Grants, HMPG.